it's a responsibility. It's not a luxury to be in a peak performance state. You know, you owe it to the world, I think.
Christian, welcome to the show.
Man, thanks for having me. Really happy to be
Absolutely.
here.
First and most important question is, how are you doing? Like, actually, for real, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well, actually. I've had a full day, very exciting morning with someone, with a young man whom we share the same middle. His name is Christian Ray. His middle name. My name is Christian Ray, and I've never met a Christian Ray, and he's never met a Christian Ray. So we had a great breakfast.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's awesome. What were you talking to that guy about? If you might want to share.
He's starting a new venture fund.
Hmm.
And really, really fascinating model, very unusual, very innovative, because venture funds, they sort of they put a lot of money to work, and they basically stress test the idea and the founder. In a way, it amplifies the failure rate because they want to not put bad money after good money. And these guys, which really costs them a lot of burnout for founders, these guys take care of the founder as a main asset. So we were talking about partnering up, because I do performance coaching, where I would be a partner for the venture fund to take care of the founders and help them not burn out and basically perform at the highest level and not lose their minds and do well. So it was a really cool conversation.
I'm really glad that our culture is making this switch to that, because I come from a sports background. So everything I relate my life to is about sports.
Yeah.
And now, like, over the last 10 years, you see how important sports psychologists are to the overall just cohesion, health, culture of a great team.
Yeah.
And I think it's now rolling into business really well, where we have people like you, or if you watch that show Billions, they have that chick Wendy in there, right? Who's like,
Yes. I love that character.
who's
Yeah.
doing stuff that you need. Because if you want people to perform at the highest level, just like you said, it's not just about grinding all the time. That model works sometimes where you have to sprint. Like, there's periods of your life where you just got to go, of course.
Yeah.
But most of the time, it's like living in that harmony of like working really hard, but also trying to recover just as hard with, your morning routine or your sleep or your eat or whatever the case may be.
Yep.
And so having that sort of person who's like, just like sitting on your shoulder, named Christian, being like, hey dude, might be time to go home to your wife and have a meal and see your kids. Like, the 13-hour day is great, but like, you'll be all right. And I think that's really important just
really
for
is.
health and well-being and longevity, and actually seeing something through, especially if it's a really good fucking idea, man. You can't put the idea into practice if you're like literally dead. Like, and I don't mean like actually dead, but like you don't feel like doing it anymore. That's no good. And that's a disservice to the greatness you could probably provide to the world.
Absolutely. I think it's a responsibility. It's not a luxury to be in a peak performance state. You owe it to the world, I think.
Yeah. Well, that leads me into what I want to initially jump off this conversation with, is purpose. It's a big question. And most people feel like it's potentially too big, that they just sort of never even go look for it. How do you think about purpose, maybe for yourself or a young man that might be listening, or whatever the case may be?
Well, I think a sense of significance is one of the core human needs. It really is. And if you're driven by purpose, I think you can operate at a much higher level, because you can reverse engineer anything downstream from that. If you're sort of reacting to life and just sort of seeing just what's right in front of you, and not driven by purpose, you're basically in survival mode permanently. And that's no way to live. I don't think it takes you to good places. But if you get yourself into a place where you can think of something that's bigger than yourself, that is one of the core qualities for a happy, healthy, wealthy life. I mean, there's studies about it, and it's just important, basically. But we live in such a rushed society, right? It's sort of one of the downsides of having so much prosperity. is we're rushed. We're reacting most of the time. I mean, half of the population in the U.S. are highly stressed out on the border of burnout. Like it's just crazy. The numbers of mental health crises are pretty high. And I think not only is it bad for you, but you're absolutely guaranteed to not be successful in that place because you're mentally, biochemically unable to imagine a different future if you're in burnout.
Do you link meaning and purpose? Do you find there's a difference in those things? Do you think someone can have meaning in their life without totally having full grasp over potentially what their purpose might be?
I mean, I think we all need meaning as a feeling. I think purpose is much more crystallized in my mind, at least. Words are so different. We attach such different meaning to the same exact words. But I guess for me, purpose would be, for example, my purpose in life, in coaching, is to equip high performance to give them the skills and the practices to reach and sustain an extraordinary life long term. That's a purpose. That's a missional level thing. And then if I have that, I can create sort of the steps, the framework, the tools that I need, the systems that I need, my personal lifestyle that I need to be able to do that. It's all basically under that, right? Now I can even get a higher purpose. Okay, why is that? Is there a higher purpose than that? Yeah, I've experienced a lot of life. I've lived, in 6 different countries on 4 continents. I've changed careers 5 times. I'm not a guy who learned about this, in a classroom. I don't know about high achievers. I am a high achiever. I know them from the inside. And I want to give to people what was given to me when I was at the peak of my first career and like completely burnt out, clinically depressed. And somebody came into my life, and literally the presence of one person and my humility towards that one person changed the very trajectory of my life that I have now. So that's a higher purpose as well. So you can go higher and higher and higher if you think about it. You have to be able to have the rhythms and the practices to think on a higher level, and most people don't even have the space for that.
Mm-hmm. But it really, what you're saying, I think it comes down to experience, though. That's important.
Yeah, I think so.
Because for a young person who hasn't found their purpose, that's okay, right? They just haven't.
Yeah.
All they've gone to is high school, and of course, some people go through really traumatic stuff in high school and as young kids, like you did, right? So maybe you found a little bit more purpose early on than just like a regular person who just like goes through high school and has their heart broken a few times and gets bullied, right? There's no sense of purpose that can be derived from that. You can find meaning in the struggle, of course, and you can overcome those challenges and learn that you're a capable human. But I'm not going to find my life's purpose in that moment, and so it just takes a little bit more experience and probably a little bit more grace. Like, okay, I'm not going to figure it out this moment, but if I do more things, go to college, travel the world, try to start this business, then things will happen, and I'll feel a gut instinct, and I'll move in the direction I'm supposed to go, and then maybe my purpose can come. But like you, my purpose has changed multiple times. Now I think I'm pretty solid in it, and it might stick with me forever. But before, man, just like go flying by the seat of my pants, wondering what was going to happen. And so
that's exactly it. Yeah,
it's cool like that, I think.
I mean, it's an evolving thing. The world changes and we change. Our purpose evolves as well. And it's not even it's not that you're not authentic in that one moment and authentic in the next. It's that in this moment, in this season of life, this purpose is the thing that crystallizes for you. So you can use that as fuel, right? And I think having no purpose is sort of the problem here, right? Zero purpose. I think the other thing I noticed, Aaron, is that it's hard for us. We have so low self-esteem oftentimes, and we're talking about incredibly successful people. I work with many of them. Relative to who they are, very low self-esteem. Why? Because it's so familiar, it doesn't feel extraordinary. From the outside in, people go, dude, that's amazing.
Right.
from the inside out, you go, yeah, but it's just little old me. So having sort of a community or a guide or a coach tell you, no, this is not ordinary. This is extraordinary. You need to dig there and find purpose in that, and trust your intuition in some of those little whispers of the soul that come along, and make something out of it that is significant. And I think that's sort of one of the biggest aha moments that I see in people, is when they start putting the puzzle together of purpose that is based on things that appear to them really mundane, and they go, oh, this is something? Are you serious? This is extraordinary. I never thought of it as extraordinary. Does it mean that I can be extraordinary? Does it mean I can do extraordinary work? Oh, okay, I'm in. Like that is the aha moment that I just love to see in people.
Mm. Have you also found, at least I've seen with a lot of high performers, myself included, that we tend to be running away from something rather than running towards something? Do you know what I mean by that?
I think I do, and I'll respond, and you tell me if you think I got your question correctly. I think running it in itself, it's almost like the term that I use is fuel, right? High performers have a lot of fuel. They're just driven. There's a lot of go in them, right? And you can tell the difference between someone who has it and who doesn't have it, right? And that's a whole maybe separate sort of investigation of why that is. But what I see in high performance, including myself, is that we have a lot of fuel. We will go regardless. But that fuel, the mix of the fuel, there's good fuel, and in it there's bad fuel. And that, I feel like that's what you're asking me, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. I mean, I'll give you an example from my first career. It was a musical career, right? And it was an unexpected musical career. I got my college degree in something completely different. That was an economics major. But I wanted to go into music. I was in my 20s. I was sort of bored with the stuff that I was doing in economics. And I'm like, I'm going to give it a try. And my fuel was, I wanted to capture the pulse of a generation in my music. Just the energy, the joy, encapsulate that. And I wanted that to resonate with millions of people. And I'm like, this is good fuel. Here's bad fuel mixed with the good fuel. I want people to accept me. I want to be loved. I want to be famous, because that would be a guarantee that I will be accepted. Yeah. And the reason I'm trying to do that is because I've been an outsider everywhere I've lived. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to guarantee love, which of course is fail. It's doomed to failure in the first place. That's bad fuel, right? And that bad fuel has all kinds of domino effects downstream, right? The things that you actually fail to do as an exceptional professional because of that bad fuel that you have. Now, if you purify your fuel and you leave the good fuel, it becomes a rocket fuel type situation, right? You progress, you go higher, you go faster. You don't hit the walls that you normally would hit just because you have bad fuel in you.
Yeah. But man, that bad fuel can get you really far.
Yes, it can.
And that's always the issue when you get to a certain level that's been fueled by this hatred or this chip on your shoulder. But fuck, dude, I'm really good at what I do now because of this bad fuel. If I switch, Christian, over to this good fuel, what if I'm not as good? What if I'm not as sharp? What if I'm not as intense? And I think, of course, you're obviously going to work with people in this space who are high performing, who probably give you this pushback. Mm-hmm. I can't switch over to this other fuel. I won't be as good. I won't be as sharp. I won't be able to produce as much. But obviously there's a way to do it in a manner that, you can do it in a healthy way that keeps you sharp, keeps you good. But now you're fueled in a different way by the good fuel, like you're saying. And you got my question perfectly right, by the way.
That's good. That's good.
And just to relate to your story as a musician, I used to be a professional wrestler, like WWE style wrestling.
Nice.
And same reasons you wanted to be a musical star were the same reasons that I wanted to be a famous WWE wrestler. I wanted to be loved and accepted, and I wanted to be famous because I thought that was super cool. And but I also really loved wrestling. So it was both like good fuel and bad fuel.
Exactly. That's
Like
exactly it. Yeah.
you know, like I just fell in love with this thing when I was a young boy, and like I didn't know what I was going to be fueled by then. I was like, oh, this shit is so cool. These dudes are running around, they're slamming each other, they're jacked. I'm like, yes, I love sports, I love superheroes. I'm in.
Yeah.
Let's do it. And so
Yeah.
that was the good fuel. But then when you get inside of it and you start to get this admiration from the fans, and they start to cheer for you, and they start to tell you how cool you are or how much they hate you, you're like, oh, I need this. Like I need this all of the time. And then you go hang out with your friends or your girlfriend or whoever it is, and you're just like, I'm Aaron again. It's like, this doesn't feel as cool. Like, why aren't
Yeah.
you telling me how great I am? Why aren't you cheering for me when I walk into the room? And there's becomes this huge push and pull of
Yeah.
my actual identity.
It'll mess you up. Yeah. It will mess you up.
Mhm.
And what you said, I think, is right. You can go far with a bad fuel. Well, the problem with that is that it's going to catch up with you eventually. Like there's just no such thing as not catching up with you. You will feel the repercussions of it and the disharmony in that. And you know, since you mentioned wrestling, I think you're going to love this story. So I was like I was an atheist growing up. I was into New Age in college, and I was like at the peak of my career, and nothing helped me, and I became a Christian, and that helped me, right? And because I became a Christian at the peak of my career, I started sort of being introduced to people, and I was famous to people who are at the peak of some career, and they needed sort of something like a spiritual path. So I meet this guy who is a Greco-Roman wrestler, and he was. Do you know anything about Greco-Roman? I'm sure you know something about Greco-Roman, right? Like
A little bit,
like
yeah.
Jason. But
Yeah.
this guy, I was living in Russia at the time. It was the 90s. This guy was basically number 2 in Russia. And Russia is very high on Greco-Roman. Like
They have some beasts out there.
massive people, right? Just they have a school of training that is just off the charts insane. So he's Olympic level, heavyweight. And at the time, the sport was owned by the mafia.
Mm.
They sponsored it, they financed the school, the training, and to pay for that, basically the people that were in the system, they were the enforcers, they were the muscle. There's big boys being the muscle. They were mafia, you know, extortion, racketeering, you name it, right? So I get introduced to this guy, Sergey. He looks like Shrek. He really does. You know, still one of my best friends. And he was like, and he hates my guts. And I have this long hair, and people like I don't know why, but they hated people with long hair. Like it was like a thing they had, right? They were very insecure people, actually. You know, usually bullies are, you know. And he would just get in my face. I was at this wrestling competition, and I was actually cheering a friend who was there competing. He was a lightweight, and this guy was a heavyweight. So he like cornered me, and I'm like, dude, you need help. You need spiritual help. And he somehow didn't kill me. And he started studying scripture and going, and I'm like, and I became his guide, basically.
Mm.
And he literally went from hating me to following me, right? And I'm like, dude, you know, this whole mafia thing, it's just not a good idea, you know. It's not gonna work with you. So he decides to leave the mafia, and I have literally people, his boss, show up in my apartment with a gun, saying, "Dude, what are you doing with my boy?" You know.
Wow.
And long story short, there was a lot of drama there. He got as the mafia does, they threaten his life. You can't leave. You know too much, etc., etc. He leaves the sport, and it was so hard for him. The reason I tell you the story is because everything about his identity had to do with wrestling and being at the top of his game on the planet, right? Being at the peak. That's all they did. They ate and they wrestled, and then they, you know, did mafia stuff. that's all they did. And it was the transition for him to detach his identity from this idolatrous sort of pursuit of just one thing. He's more than wrestling. I had a front row seat to it, and he's a great guy. He's doing really well right now. One of my best friends.
Yeah, that's a great story. Yeah, it's really complicated to detach your identity from one thing that really means everything to you.
Yeah. I mean,
how did you make that transition out of your pop career?
That's a really good choice, and I think the reason why I see this all the time, and this was also true of me, is that I would rather be essentially at the very core of the dilemma. I would rather be famous, successful, have Olympic medals, whatever that thing is, than happy.
Mm.
And basically that's literally the choice in their minds. And because anybody can be happy, but not anybody can be an Olympic level heavyweight wrestler. You know, anybody can be happy, but not anybody can command the attention of 20,000 people in the sports arena and have them jumping up and down and singing every word.
Right.
I'd rather do that because that gives me this heightened sense of purpose, even if it wrecks me from the inside for whatever reason, right? And that's why how people become workaholics, right? Because of significance of purpose, falsely attached purpose, I would say, and that catches up with you eventually. So for me, the way it caught up with me was surprisingly, it was sort of the romantic life piece, because I had this childhood trauma. My parents got divorced when I was 14 years old, and I literally lost faith in marriage and romance in general. And then part of me, I wanted to love and be loved just like everybody else, right? In my 20s, and then that clashes with this idea of almost like long-term happiness romantically, because I go, oh, the other shoe will drop, and then hearts will be broken, and every marriage ends in tragedy, and then the kids are your hostages, and they get traumatized. So if anything got serious, I would just sabotage the relationship. Then on top of that, well, you remember how I said about the bad fuel, that I just want to be loved, guaranteed?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, here's the dark side of that. If like millions of girls know your name,
Mm-hmm.
like half of the teenage population has posters on their walls of you, how are you supposed to know if she likes the persona or she likes you?
Yeah,
And that's it. Now you're stuck.
Yeah.
Now you're stuck, right? And that was sort of my big thing, is that I was like, I can't, I don't even know how to deal with it, basically, So it took somebody to help me and guide me on how to rethink, reframe romance in general, marriage, that I am not my career. I'm so much more than that, actually, and then that's a slow process. That's why personal development, a practice of introspection every day, routines, strategies for that are so important for you to succeed long term.
Yeah, I mean, it's an endlessly evolving journey, personal
Yeah.
development. That's why
Yeah.
it's so cool.
Yeah.
That's why everyone can jump into it, because there's something you can learn
Yeah.
new every day about yourself, your partner, the people you're around, the world,
Exactly.
whatever it is.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is that when, in that transition, is that when you got introduced to Christianity and religion became a serious part of your life?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, because I was so arrogant. I'm fairly well educated, very well read. I speak 4 languages. I'm this pop star. I have all this arrogance, right, just oozing out of me. On top, I'm like in my mid-20s. Everybody's arrogant in their mid-20s, I think, to one degree or another. We feel invincible and right about everything, right? and it's just not true. And but in hindsight, you know that, but in the moment, you don't. So it sort of took a massive, sort of almost like a cataclysmic failure, emotional failure, to get me to a place where I could even accept guidance. So I had this girlfriend. She was a runway model, because I was supposed to date runway models. I was like a walking cliche. And she got pregnant. We had a baby. And then I was like, I don't know what to do with this. I continued on my self-sabotage journey. I would be a jerk. I would basically drive them away on purpose. So, of course, she did exactly that and cut me off of my daughter. So I lost contact with my daughter for 6 years.
Wow.
She didn't even know I was her dad.
Oh.
It's like I'm a walking soap opera, right? And that's the thing that brought me to my knees, and I was literally peaking in my career. I was helping elect a president. I was campaigning for a president, and I was like clinically depressed. And I met this guy. Somebody invited me to a church service. And I'm like, all right, I'll go. And because I'm so I'm so so humbled by now. And I meet this guy. He's this Canadian missionary, so smart. And I think what got me is that he was not just this normal priest or pastor. He was like genius level IQ kind of guy. So I'm like, okay, he's smart. I'm gonna listen to him. That was sort of my excuse. And I was with him and his family. We're having dinner in his kitchen. And imagine like European apartments are super small. And I see his family and I go, gosh, these guys have something. And I literally turn to him and I go, how do I get what you have? And somehow I think maybe by the expression in my face, he knew exactly what I was talking about. And he was like, I can teach you. And I'm like, all right. And that's it. It was sort of this. It's probably the first time I experienced the power of coaching in my life, because I basically determined a pain point, a need in my life, something that I couldn't get on my own. And I found someone who can teach me how to get there. Right. And I decided to trust that guy with my life. And that's it. Everything changed. Like he got me just mature, fixed, healed in a matter of months, basically. And I eventually sort of, I dated one girl, another girl, then I found Deb. She's American, so we met in LA, and she moved to Russia to be with me, and I've been married now for her for 25 years.
Beautiful.
Happiest marriage. Never ever had a crisis. Never ever talked about divorce. Not once in 25 years. I mean, that's a pretty significant turnaround after having 3 generations of broken homes in my family.
Yeah. Couple questions off that. One, when you were in the midst of your pop career, was there ever, issues with drugs and alcohol? Was that ever a vice of yours, or you stayed away from that a bit?
I sort of, I experimented with it. I just dabbled, and it didn't take. And the reason it didn't take is because I think part of it is there's 2 things that was my saving grace. One, I just don't have an addictive personality. Like I just don't in anything. And B, I was so ambitious and focused. I wanted to be a professional. And I was like this very strange pop star that literally had a ban on drugs. Like I'm like, if you're gonna work for me, you're not gonna do any of that. You can't be drunk ever on tour. You're not gonna do drugs. If you're fired if I find you with drugs. And I couldn't even, like, I had a ban on sleeping around with groupies. Like it was the most buzzkill band ever. Because the people that invite you and they do the show, one of the benefits for them traditionally is that they get to party with you.
Right.
So they would roll out like insane food. They would bring girls and whatever, anything you want, because they want to party with you. They want to associate with you. And I'm like, no, I'm just going to my room. Sorry. This is not something I'm interested in. I'll get people really mad at me for doing that. But I dabbled. In Molly and ecstasy and things like that. But I always went like, is this going to help me long term? Basically, that was sort of my thinking. And I would be like, this was fun. But yeah, that's probably not going to help me long term. Actually, it's going to mess me up long term. I'm going to stop doing that. So yeah, it didn't stay.
That's very level headed of you in that moment. And then other question based on the story you told was, how and when did you reconnect with that daughter?
Oh, that was an amazing story. So, gosh, it was the most painful thing in my life. In fact, when I met Deb, we went on our first date in LA, and I was actually performing at this big conference for Christians in show business. So we performed. I remember it was really what an honor, because I performed at the Pantages Theater. This is the place where they used to have the Oscars, and we were, like, I performed there, and it was fantastic. And we were on a date. We went to Universal Studios for the whole day, and we just walk around and talk. And I told her, like, she reminded me later, but I told her, I used to have a daughter. So I talked about my daughter in the past tense. It was so painful to think about it that I would disconnect myself with the past tense sort of piece, right? And she was like, really? And so I told her the story, like first date, I told her everything. And then eventually we got married, and I had a friend who was, I was hosting a conference in Moscow, and it was sort of the same conference only for Europe and other places. And so I had a keynote speaker. I flew him in. He was a buddy of mine from the Philippines, from Manila, and he's like also a Christian and a top rock star guy. So I brought him in as a keynote speaker, and we're hanging out. And so I'm telling him his story. We're just bonding, and he goes, "Dude, I have the same story, and I got my son back. Like it was the same thing, only he had a boy." I'm like, "Really? Seriously?" And so he told me a story is very similar. So we're like, "Whoa, that's amazing. I've never met anyone like that." And he goes, "Let me ask you, do you pray about your daughter?" And I'm like, "Okay, no one's ever asked me that. I'm supposed to be this spiritual guy." And I go, "Actually, no. If I'm honest, it's just too painful." And he goes, "Look, I want to challenge you, dude, that you pray. Supernatural stuff happens if you pray." And I go, "Okay, get it. Yeah, I'll do it." And then I started praying about her every night. It was just a sentence or two, and I just start putting it out there. I think it took another, maybe I want to say, maybe another 4 years after that, maybe 3, maybe 4, and things start moving in incredibly supernatural ways. So her mom, the model that I was talking to you about, ended up marrying a very famous tennis player, top seeded on the planet. So she's jet setting somewhere in Europe. They own a house somewhere. And all I see of my daughter is gossip magazines and stuff like that. I see my daughter only on that. Really painful. All of a sudden, she shows up, my ex, and she reaches out to somebody I knew, a girl I knew. And she's like, I remember Christian was going to this, this church, and he was studying the Bible. I sort of need some Bible help here. Like out of nowhere. So she sort of reaches out to Christians somewhere and becomes a Christian in Switzerland. I have zero leverage, zero in this whole thing. Like I just witness things evolving supernaturally. And the reason for that is because her marriage was failing. She already had another kid with this guy, and it was just breaking apart. Couldn't save her marriage, moves back to the city, to Moscow, comes to my church, and my daughter is in my children's program.
Wow.
And basically, first we're like, we don't know how to tell her because she's been told this other guy was her father. So it's like soap opera stuff, right? So we're like really agonizing of how to not traumatize the kid, or and so it took us a little bit of time to figure out. And we thought we were going to come up with a very sophisticated plan. And my ex, her name is Masha. She was like, "Screw it, I'm going to just tell her." And so she tells her without really asking me. And we're like, I think it was like a fellowship break at church. So she brings her over, and she's like, "Christian, hi." I'm like, "Hi." She goes, "I just told her." Like we're in the break. Like we're not even at we're not even in a good setting for that kind of thing. And I go, "Told her what?" And she goes, "I told her," and she's right there, "that you're her dad." I'm like, like my life is flashing, in my. So I turned to Diana, my daughter. She was 6 at the time. I'm like, and she goes, "Yes, I know." And I'm like, and then the girl, Masha, says, "Okay, so talk to her," and just leaves. And so I'm like, okay, and I kneel, to be on her level, and I said, "Hey, I know that you didn't know I was your dad, but I knew I was your dad, and I longed for this, and I prayed for you every day." And that's all I could think of saying. And she literally wraps her hands around my neck and wouldn't let go. And I just lose it on my knees in church, lose it, like sobbing. And that's how I got her back.
Beautiful. And how's your relationship with her now?
She lives 10 minutes away from me in Austin, Texas.
Let's go.
That's so awesome. Yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah. So good. So good. It's a miracle. And absolutely. I can't explain it any other way.
That is a miracle. Yeah. Wow. Speaking of miracles, I want to talk about uncertainty. And I think really the only reason, or not the only reason, the only way we can talk about that, I think, in full context is understanding how you grew up just a little bit. And I know this story is very public and you've talked about it on a lot of podcasts, So you can share as much or as little as you want. And then that'll segue us into how you handle adversity now and how people maybe can handle it better themselves in their everyday life.
So, yeah, I think what you're referring to is sort of this very strange and pretty intense first few years of my life. I basically moved 4 different countries, 3 continents by age 7. And the way it started is that, I was 5 years old. My dad was there was a military coup in Chile. My dad's Chilean. And he ended up in a concentration camp. They killed, tortured a bunch of people out there. It's a famous story. General Pinochet was the guy who perpetrated the whole thing. And we ended up in a refugee facility for a few months, ended up becoming sort of exiles. And so I basically happened to have this very Forrest Gumpy kind of experience as a kid, where I would be military coup in Chile, civil war in Mozambique. I ended up there at age 7. Went back to Russia. By the time I was out of college, I saw tanks in the streets of Moscow because the Soviet Union was falling apart. So all of that is in a lifetime of a young person. And what that taught me, and also in between those things, there's danger, obviously, threat to your life, a lot of poverty, food lines, ration cards for food, bombings, all kinds of things that are just not normal. If you grew up in America, hopefully you haven't experienced any of that stuff. And then social instability, all of that, right? So uncertainty was literally the anthem of my life until I was my mid-20s. And the benefit of that, if you know how to process that, is that there's 2 things. One is this: you are capable, you and I, all of us humans, are very, very capable of a lot of suffering without actually losing our minds. So we fear the bad scenarios of our lives, but we can totally handle them, actually. And because we don't know we can handle them, we don't go into uncertainty easily. We don't take risks. And that's, to me, a weakness, right? So the strength I developed in that is oh, I can handle this and this and this and this. It's fine. It's not going to kill you. So I can take risks and start a new company or start a music career that has close to zero probability of success, or move countries and change 3 times start different companies, nonprofits, and do it over and over again, pivot, because I know that the downside is way exaggerated in people's minds, and even in my mind, I can process that. So that's sort of one aspect that I think can be trained into us when it comes to this grit. I call it anti-fragility. It's actually better than grit. And then the other aspect is that if you understand at a very, almost like in your bones, you understand that life is absolutely uncertain. There is no such thing as certainty, fundamentally. You can get cancer tomorrow, and everything will change. Your company will file for bankruptcy. Your boss will leave, and an idiot boss will come in. There's all kinds of uncertainty that pursues us throughout our lives. What is certain in life is that uncertainty is a permanent thing, right? So if you know that, and fundamentally, if you integrate that in a positive way, you go, well, if everything is uncertain, then anything is possible. And once you get that, almost like this DNA in you, this lens through which you can see the world, then you start seeing all kinds of possibilities, all kinds of opportunities. And that is a great quality to have to be a successful, high-performance guy, right? Or girl.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, humans we just deal with such this deep dichotomy of wanting to have this tight control over our lives, but knowing that shit's just gonna happen the way it happens.
It totally does. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
you don't have as much control as you think you do. Yeah.
No, and I think people only start to realize that when they're hit with something that's really hard. You just happen to be hit with it very early.
Exactly.
It took me till I was hit with some very painful loss to realize this shit could be gone in an instant. Might as well just go for whatever and do what not just randomly do shit that I feel, still trying to be in alignment with my purpose and stuff, but knowing this conversation that I have with you, Christian, could be the last time that we ever speak. And I hope it's not, but it could be. And so I'm going to try to make it the absolute best it can be, because this is the moment that I'm in right now, right here. And there's so much uncertainty in that. Like, if I'll ever see you again. I mean, I live in Dallas, you live in Austin. Like, the odds are pretty high that we actually might see each other again in person. Yeah,
exactly.
But you never know. And that's the uncertainty of life. But that's what also makes the conversation so cool, that this is it. This is the, like, I don't know if you've ever heard of this guy named Dr. Michael Gervais, but he's a sports psychologist, a high performance sports psychologist. And he talks about this in the way he says goodbye to people. He's like, when I say goodbye, I like literally mean goodbye. And that keeps me in the moment all the way up until I say goodbye, because I just don't know. And he's talked about this so much on the podcast now that he says, like, when he's like with his friends, like, people beat him to the punch. Like, no, my doctor, I'm saying this before you. I'm saying goodbye before. It's kind of a running joke that he has now, but I get it. It's just like another strategy or tool that you've talked about that we have to implement to keep us in this moment. And whatever works for you works for you. But that's just something that he keeps in the back of his mind that I thought was very, very interesting.
That's very good. That's very, very good. I like that.
Yeah. And another great concept you brought up was anti-fragility, which is one of the best things that I've discovered from Tal Ben-Shahar that I think all people should look at. Just being able to be knocked down so many times, no matter what, that you just keep coming back stronger, 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 stronger.
That's true. I actually talked to Tal on my podcast, and it's really fascinating because he was on my podcast, and we're talking about anti-fragility, and I'm like, so let's talk. And I already knew the concept. I teach it. I coach in it, and he goes, the other term is post-traumatic growth. And that was a really cool insight from Tal, who's, by the way, if you're listening, he's one of the top experts on happiness on the planet. And he's an Israeli guy. He taught, and I think still teaches at Harvard. And he said, when I, like a freshman class of psych majors, if I ask the class, what do you know what PTSD is? Do you know the concept? And every hand goes up, right? PTSD, everybody knows that. He goes, what is PTG? Who knows? And he goes, less than 10% of the people raise their hand. These are people studying psychology. Mm-hmm. And he goes, people just don't know. And it's basically anti-fragility and post-traumatic growth is essentially the same phenomenon. And it's that you through suffering, through things that happened with you in your childhood or early youth, you develop the ability to be better and stronger because of it, not in spite of it, because of it. And if you start understanding that this is how you can grow, that changes everything, the way you approach life, challenges, new ventures, all of that stuff. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, it's about sort of making the switch from working from the outside in, but from the inside out. And exactly. I think that's really important. It's really important. But another thing that is sort of on the top of my mind as I was thinking about this conversation was America. I love America. But currently in our sort of communication, there's some anti-American sentiments just with how divisive some things might be and whatever the case is. But as an immigrant, someone who's lived in many different places and seen a lot of different stuff, why do you like America and why do you choose to live here?
I think to me, it's the best country on the planet, right? And I can tell you exactly why. And part of the reason why I think it's good for me to talk about that, I actually wrote a book about it that I'm releasing later in the fall, called Little Book of Big Reasons to Love America. It's 10 chapters, 10 reasons. And I tell a lot of the stories from my background. But part of the reason why I feel like it's interesting to hear that from me, because I grew up, literally, I was brainwashed. I grew up in a Marxist household. In all of my surroundings, my whole youth, all the way to probably my early 20s, America was the evil thing. It was the empire. It was the evil exploiter of the planet, the bully, the military bully, the economic bully, all of those things. So I grew up in that environment for literally most of my youth. And what happened is I heard that and I said yes to all of that, of course, because you're a young person, you don't know better. But then your life experience shows you the alternative. Okay, what does life look like if you don't have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, an independent judiciary? If it's not a meritocracy, if it's really a collectivistic top-down sort of system, what are the results? And all you see is poverty, violence, misery, the reign of mediocrity, scarcity. That's what I see. Then you go to college and you study Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, and you study Karl Marx side by side. And you look out the window and you see at least that scenario, right? And at the same time, I read books about America, I see movies, and I see this almost like this parallel universe, this parallel reality of a world that I will never have access to. And I go, yeah, actually that looks very appealing to me, in spite of the things that I've been told. They had this sort of thing that the West is rotting, the rotting West. And in the Soviet Union, especially when in like mid 80s, people would like sarcastically, the Soviets were like, you know what, I'd like to have a little bit of that rot in my life. If I could have a little bit more of that, that would be nice. Because it was just it was so clear that it was just a bunch of lies, right? And so eventually I became intensely anti-communist, anti-Marxist, anti-collectivist. And I realized that all of that is just a mask, an ideology that masks tyranny, oppression, and enslavement of people. It was like a big prison. And I was behind the Iron Curtain, and I looked at the other side of the Iron Curtain, which is the West, Western civilization as a whole, the U.S. specifically. And I saw opportunity, I saw freedom, I saw choices, I saw creativity, entrepreneurship. I saw sort of a very generous spirit of people. That it's the most philanthropic nation on the planet. I saw the role of family, the family values that were at the core of sort of this very stable, successful, healthy, love-filled environment, this culture, right? And it's not perfect, but a lot of those core pillars were there, and they were absent where I was. And that became the book, 10 Reasons, right? And it's everything. And also the first chapter is about being an immigrant. And you can still feel like an American. You feel accepted here. And I've been an outsider everywhere I've been my whole life. And somebody asked me on another podcast, where do you feel most at home? And I said, I feel most at home in America. Because people think of me as an American, even though I grew up in other places. Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah. Yeah, you found your home in Austin, Texas. That's amazing.
I love it, yeah. And I love Texas, too.
It's a good place to live.
It really is, yeah. It's awesome.
Yeah. Last sort of nugget of wisdom I want to get from you, Christian. You just mentioned family values. You've been married 25 years. I'm married at this point like 8 weeks.
Oh my, congratulations. That's fantastic.
Thank you so much. What tips, tricks, tools, anything you found useful in creating a successful union, anything like that?
I would say get coaching from people who are they model what you want to be, basically. That's probably the number one thing. Consistently. And I mean, not like, hey, give me some advice, pointers, everything. I mean, attach yourself, beg for people to witness your marriage. And it was like the best decision I'd made in my life was we had this couple that literally we went pre-marriage counseling to them, and we would meet every 2 weeks, and we would be like, I said this and she said that, and I felt like this, and then he did that, and they would like break it down and essentially help us navigate basic communication. And then after we got married, we did the same thing for 2.5 more years. And I think because of that guidance before and right after, I had this very solid foundation. I've had an extraordinary marriage for 25 years because the almost like the foundation, the stones of the foundation are so strong that I can build something on. But it takes this intentionality and work and guidance and seeking wisdom, I think, to do it. So that's probably the number one thing I would say. And I would say number two is understanding gender roles. As sort of old schooly as that may sound, is there are gender roles, and they're like hardwired into us, and you need to figure those out. You need to figure out what is your role, what is her role, what is her role in your life, and your role in her life, and you lean into those things because those roles are usually fairly challenging for both, and aspire high. Like I made that decision. Okay, that's another one. That's a third one probably, right? I come from 3 generations of broken homes. I basically decided, look, I'm good at quite a few things in life. I'm a high achiever. This is the highest achievement I can have. And I will absolutely give up money, status, progress, scale, fame, all of it, if it gets in the way of my marriage and my children and my parent. All of it. There's nothing more important to me at all in life. And that's, if you are an ambitious, driven guy and that's your ambition, you'll do well. But if you're an ambitious guy and this is sort of, your marriage is sort of like an afterthought to your real ambition, you will not do well. And that's the bottom line.
Yeah. That's perfect. I have my parents are still married, so I have very strong,
that's awesome,
role models for them in my life. And I mean, I say I'm the luckiest man in the world simply because I got lucky to have them as parents.
Yeah. It's a huge deal.
It's huge. My wife, doesn't come from that same thing. And so being able to, and we live very close to my parents. My wife's family still lives in England. And so we're around them a lot and we see their dynamic and how they work through stuff. And so that's an incredible blessing, as well as being around some of our other friends who've, been married for a few years now and how they navigate stuff. And, God willing, we can have kids soon and that'll change everything, of course. But it's all beautiful. And I'm very lucky just to be in it, working on it in itself, that I found someone who wants to spend the rest of their life with me, hopefully, God willing. So it's amazing.
That's I promise you this, you will never regret investing in your marriage. You can regret in investing in all kinds of things, not your marriage. Yeah. It is quite literally the most important thing that will matter for you the longest. Guaranteed. So invest in it. Like, I invest in it as you would aspire to build $1 billion company. That kind of level of commitment. And you'll never regret it. It's an amazing thing. Yeah,
beautiful point. Well, last thing, Christian, anything you want to mention that we didn't touch on, that's important or that I missed or anything like that?
Not really. I mean, maybe the only thing that I would add is if something like this, what we talked about with Aaron, made sense to you, check out my newsletter. I have a free newsletter that comes out every Sunday. You can find it very easily by going to christianrayflores.com and you'll get it. Something like what you heard, like a bit of that every Sunday, a little portion of wisdom, guidance, inspiration in your inbox once a week.
Yeah, check it out. It'll be linked in the show notes below, along with all the coaching stuff. And you can check out his podcast too, under the same name, right? Headspace for both Substack and the podcast.
Yeah, Headspace by Christian Ray Flores. Yeah.
So easy to find.
Very
everywhere on the internet, sort of just like everyone these days. But,
exactly.
Yeah. But great, Christian. Great to meet you. Thanks for joining me. Appreciate the work you're doing, and enjoyed this conversation very much.
Thank you, Aaron. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much for tuning into that episode. And if you enjoyed it, click right here for another full-length episode of the podcast. And please don't forget to subscribe. But most importantly, above all else, please take good care of yourselves and others. And I'll see you next time. Lots of love. Cheers.